Hey, so welcome. I'm here with Rod Taylor, longtime colleague and friend, and here to visit with you, Rod, and ask you just about your experience as a teacher, your evolution as a teacher. What led you to become a teacher? And maybe what was your initial orientation or focus? How has that shifted over time? What kind of students do you find are drawn to you and you are drawn toward? Just anything you'd like to share about the experience of being a teacher, and perhaps for new teachers to hear. So,
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Deborah, for initiating this with us all. It's interesting. I'd been a long-term spiritual teacher when I became involved in this work. And so when I came into being a teacher, I was into being a mentor. I was aware of kind of the different kind of nature of this work, and that the role of the mentor was really to be with people on a kind of a friendship and supportive basis. And that was transformational in a particular way that applies to this work. And that is discovering the truth of a person's own evolutionary path. And it was remarkable because I had a lot of kind of concepts of what would be good for people and how, but it wasn't my role as a mentor. But I discovered that occasionally I'd ask people about something that just seemed so obvious to me that might kind of shorten their discomforts. And then they would say, no, 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 and then go on through their discomforts over a period of time, following their own track, and then later come back and say, guess what I just discovered? And it was so rich to see that their own course of life was the evolutionary process that was awakening them. And this work is supporting them in that process. So from my perspective, being a teacher is being an ongoing mentor, respecting the process of everybody. That's the evolutionary process, and we're really like a support system for them. And as our awareness grows as teachers, still the ground is supporting people's own evolutionary process.
that's brilliant. I love that.
And it's such a support of it as a teacher, rather than feeling, oh no, how do I help fix or direct this person? It's, what's useful from my standpoint here, more than being just with them. And often there are angles and avenues of useful kind of information, but it's offering it to see whether it's part of their process and will be helpful to them.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Can you say more about how your past work as a teacher, what kind of, it sounds like you came in with some concepts that, your role was to maybe disseminate information or guide or lead more than you later determined was organically appropriate in this work? Or
Well, what I discovered in this work was an additional or new dimension, of the awakening field. So whole being realization is whole being. And I would say that pretty much most or all paths in past decades and centuries were very much engaged with consciousness development or energy development. And so, you have consciousness awakening occurring, but kind of lacking the embodiment or the interconnection. The field of energy, Kundalini awakening or Chi awakening, was in that area of, particularly focused in the area of the energetic subtlety of creation. And in both fields, there was a recognition of relationship. But from my perspective now, this is a new time where humanity is realizing that dimension of mutuality. And it's not about how to behave in it. It's actually about a realization on a very deep level of the intimate nature of creation and us as a part of it. And this field of mutuality, people would have said, well, we did a lot of relationship work in the past, spiritually or practically. This is not about relationship work. This is about deepening awareness into, what I call three domains of mutuality. The field of the conscious field that we're all a part of, the inner dimension of our inner relationship and our inner split, and the aspect of seeing and being seen by others. Mm. When we awaken to that, even though in this work we're very particular about ways to support each other in awakening through supportive mutuality, it doesn't keep being a place of, or specifically a focus of work. It's actually a field of realization. We're awakening in mutuality. And therefore, whether we behave what looks well or not well in the eyes of others, it doesn't stop us from being in the field of mutuality. And therefore, it is our discovery process in that arena that is so supportive of a rich development in particularly in awakened life. So as a teacher, having background in consciousness development and chi development, in this work is bringing in both this trust in the activation of being in a person's process, but also my own whole being process and trusting I'm being who I am at this point, and this recognition of this intimate field of mutuality that is one of trust and connection. And that leads the way, in our work and in our process.
Wow. I love these nuanced distinctions. It's really, really key. Along those lines, how do you find your work with individuals as compared to working in groups? Could you say a little about mutuality in both contexts, or anything else in both contexts?
Yeah, there are two angles of experience as a teacher. And the confidence in the evolutionary process arose through this one-on-one experience in particular. And finding that with individuals, meeting them in the moment and trusting that which is arising is very empowering to trust the teacher role as part of this wholeness and this interconnectedness. In my own teaching role over time, I found that being invited by people in groups and communities to do workshops, particularly where initially I was teaching on my own, was a wonderful vehicle for finding my voice as a teacher. The voice of offering to a group or to others. And that was really a lovely discovery as I was offering workshops, just to find I wasn't trying to remember things that were to be offered. There was the arising of my knowing and my new knowing that was coming in the moment. And so that was really a treat, and it gave me increased confidence in honoring the field, the awakened field, that has an offering for each of us within and for the other. And so it's a rich kind of development of myself as a teacher that was not planned, wasn't organized, but was more just that I found myself being drawn into this work. And I wasn't drawn, actually, what I would have expected is, I've been a teacher in the past, I should be a teacher now. When I was in this work, I never had that inclination. It was actually something more that grew from within. So I would say for new teachers, if that kind of nature of self is feeling that expression, that's a beautiful way for it to occur. And it means also, rather than pushing ourselves to be like a teacher, it's actually continuing to follow that expression that's arising in its own time, in its own pace, whatever that is. Then the whole experience is rich, evolutionary for both the self and the other, and giving oneself an opportunity to lean into whatever situations are there. Sometimes they're organizational, sometimes they're supportive, and sometimes they're leading. And I think everybody's path is going to be unique according to our own kind of sensing of it and our own choosing to lean in where it seems like we're invited or it's available.
Listening to you, I'm just getting this sense almost of a process of rotting a teacher might go through, out of the role or
Mm.
expectation and into the moment, into the reality.
That's a very good way to put it. And I think I had really rotted out well when I got into this work. So I kind of had no expectations anymore and definitely not about my role. So it really wasn't me choosing. It was really arising. And I think it's a beautiful thing for us to realize that it's no longer about achieving being a teacher. It's actually honoring the arising, if that's what is calling us and being called by others. And I've certainly been, richly engaged by people who have been calling on me. And I'm not really a promoter at all, so it's kind of like a lovely surprise for people to want to work with me or want me to offer a workshop. And I know everybody's path isn't like that. Some people have much more of a capacity and a skill for promoting, and that helps them to express themselves. But I am noting that in honoring my non-promotional nature, in contrast to feeling the duty to promote at earlier stages of my work, it's been such a fulfilling experience to notice, oh, I'm being called to do this as long as I am. And I think that puts a lovely light for all of us in finding who we are, teaching a lot or a little, serving more administratively, organizationally, or teaching-wise. And it's great to have all of us, all the teachers, whatever their inclination, and all of the community that's drawn to being engaged to kind of note their own evolution, expressing whatever means that they have.
It's beautiful, so eloquent and concise and rich. Thank you. Yeah. Sensing. I'm curious if you could go back to a phrase you used, the inner split, when you were talking about different kinds of mutuality.
Yeah. It's interesting that we talk about the spirit matter split in this work, noticing the inner split. And it's often, we recognize that it's felt as a core discomfort, or a core wound. That word has been used. It's an honorable, it's an honorable terminology to reflect the way it feels to be human for many people and feel this underlying quality that's beyond even explanation. And so that split has been, from my perspective, a key propellant of evolution in the previous paradigm of human development. It's been, oh, I've got to accomplish something. I need to succeed here. I've got to fulfill it. I need to find consciousness or God. So it's driven us that way. The wonderful discovery now is that impulse or that drive that's felt uncomfortable, that's led to all this human progress and personal evolution, it's kind of rotting away. It's gone as far as it can go usefully for many of us. And that's very confusing if you've been an achiever and a directed seeker, whatever. It's very confusing. But it's opened us to this recognition that this impulse that's been driving us unconsciously, usually, is something that hasn't gone away in all of the achieving. Even the realizing, it hasn't gone away. So fortunate for us at this time, we've given up, or really it was kind of not intentional. We just found our being couldn't keep motivating ourselves away. And it's been beautiful to have this work offering those who are noticing that a support to say, oh, this isn't wrong. This is actually the next stage of evolution. And from that standpoint, we've been looking inward and realizing, oh, it's actually an innocent discomfort of a recognition of our nature as infinite and finite. And that the discomfort is actually related to that, something unresolvable deep within us. So we talk about it as the core paradox. Something that I realized more recently was that it's actually, our condition and our issue is not actually a paradox. It's actually a tridox.
Oh.
It's that we are in relationship with these elements of ourself. infinite and finite, feeling like they can't meld.
Mm.
But the relationship between them is us, the field of interconnectedness. This reflects the kind of the three-in-one perspective or origin of the universe, as I've previously recognized it, that we have these dynamics of consciousness, being, and relatedness, which I would say is love. This dynamic of arising in humanity, or as in creation, let's say, shows up in our individuality in a split condition in a way that feels uncomfortable because we're split from our origin.
Mm.
So in this work, as we deepen and meet and hold and become conscious as that core wound or core discomfort, core paradox, we find ourselves awakening into a trinity of consciousness, being, and love that is just the truth of our nature and was never wrong, was actually our origin point or our creation point as our individuality. So going towards the split and the discomfort, which can be quite hard, scary, and uncomfortable, and require this kind of attention that we provide in this work, supporting it over quite an extended period of weeks, months, or even years, we find ourselves increasingly sitting as that discomfort. That discomfort begins to transform as really the fire of our being. And that's the source of kind of the awareness and trust and love that is just true. Not needing to be developed, but true. And there we find a deep trust in being us.
Mm. I love that. I really appreciate your phrasing, the innocent discomfort and how that transforms into the fire of our being. That's very powerful language, very immediate, really summarizes the process. Wow. And I have the sense as you're speaking, this language is very embodied. It's not something you constructed from the top down. It's emergent with your process.
Yes, it's the discovery of what we're becoming. And as I've been deepening, and it's included discriminative awareness, but based on experience, leading. That the richness of meeting the discomfort and the richness of being freed of the sense of it being a wound. Oh, it never was a wound. Felt like a wound. It's not a wound. And then deeper, it's not only is it a confusion, but it's actually a richness it's a freedom, a discovering of freedom in being life, being manifestation, being creation.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it's a lived experience. So people don't need to take on these ideas that I'm saying or that we say in this work. It's actually not about that. It's actually just about supportive direction to being with that split that we found that being present with it with support is evolutionary in this particular way, in its own time, as long as it takes.
Mm. Yes.
And it's nice to know that this woundedness might not always feel like a woundedness. There's no rush, because actually it feeling like a wound is a very strong attractor to our evolutionary process. So it's not like we want it to go away. We want to digest it.
Mm-hmm.
And find ourselves as it, and it's not what we thought it was.
Right.
It's this dynamic of manifestation occurring, and seems to be, from my perspective, the next step of human evolution. And I hear it showing up in different paths that previously were not so concerned about the individual story or the relationships and so on. Well, it seems like it's arising throughout humanity, and it feels to me like this Trillium work has really still a sharp discrimination on what is particularly supporting people to go through this whole being awakening process. And that has to do with removing the override of knowing how it's going to turn out and how it should be and beliefs about it, into living it deeply and honestly with real support. Real support meaning those who can be with us without needing to change it any quicker than its own capacity of evolution within.
Mm. It's lovely. I have one more question, maybe two more questions. I've read about the retreats you have been offering in Thailand, and the recent one has a very interesting description of the we space, or what happens amongst kind of the emergent process of the retreat itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how that maybe relates to some of the things you've been mentioning.
Yes, good.
Does that question make sense?
Yes, it does. That's
Yeah.
great. So the exciting thing about this time is both that we're realizing this field of mutuality, or you could call it non-separate interconnectedness, as a field of realization. For ourselves to be really here as an awakened point of creation in ourselves requires these three dimensions to be lived as the fire of our being, you could say. When we become that presence, we find increasingly that we're part of a whole. Part of a whole that means not just the whole of the conscious field that we may have a relationship to, but a part of the whole of the manifest field, the continuum of unmanifest to manifest. In that manifest field, our uniqueness matters, and it's actually been part of our path of awakening to honor our own discomforts, our own achievements, so that uniqueness matters. And in awakening and finding this non-separate interconnectedness, we're finding that other points of creation are also equally honorable and beautiful and unique. And in doing that, we find our old inclination to find, oh, we know each other, we can be the same, we can merge, doesn't actually work. It's actually, oh, that's a different person, but they're awakened. But they're different. And they don't make sense on some levels. And the undeniable interconnectedness is true. And it feels like love. It is love. And so we're finding ourselves, you could say, in the field of manifest love. And we thought love was a particular way of knowing each other so intimately we could feel the so-called oneness of ourselves. But this love is coming through the uniqueness. This is even more exciting because it's not me meeting me, it's me meeting creation in another form, which is exciting and confusing because they don't operate the way we think they should exactly. I don't get them, and I love them without any reason. So this field becomes a tangible field of the collective. And the collective allows us to be our individuality and requires it, but allows us to be part of something more as a human evolution, a humanity evolution, a whole being universe evolution. From that standpoint, it can be thrilling to be an awakened component of that. It's kind of like as teachers, as mentors and teachers, we begin to discover that in our role, we know more than we thought we knew. That the right thing to be shared or offered comes at the right moment. It is us, and it's more than us. It's honestly, authentically, this expression of me or you or someone else, and it's more than we know. And we have that opportunity as teachers and mentors to kind of deepen into that trust in being. And so many people don't have such a clear experience of a role and an opportunity to. But in this work and in spiritual work at this time, there's an increasing interest in this we space factor. And the we space factor is not losing our individuality. It's the discovery that we are that wholeness. And we're in there with a bunch of other individualities that all share that ground in wholeness. And so in our awakening process, in this work and in other works, we have a chance to, in our own time and in our own readiness, increasingly discover our beautiful engagement in this wholeness. And I think it's particularly valuable for people who are finding their whole being realization coming alive in them at any stage, but noticing these dimensions alivening, and particularly people who have had that shift into whole being realization. There's kind of a what's next. Well, part of the what's next is there's going to be lots more of meeting the split, because it's a well-formed structure that needs a lot more resolution and deepening and holding and digesting. However, a lot of folks are continuing to look at the discomforts and what they haven't finished. But simultaneously, they're having access to this whole field. So I feel like in this time in particular, people can begin to enjoy the expression of being. And they have the capacity to, because some of those boundaries have been dissolved in their awakening process. And so it's possible then for us to intentionally open to, especially in environments that support it, to open to being our awakened nature. Mm. And being that awakened nature amongst others who are opening to it. Giving voice to creation, giving voice to being, giving consciousness the field of movement through each of our individualities. And so I think that's a really valuable attention for all of us, that we are, whether we're aware of it or not, part of a collective conscious beingness. There's no rush. This isn't a moral obligation. It's a joy of the awakening process when we're ready and ripe to play in that field and find the partnership with all these other strange other individuals that are different, co-exploring this field of love and this expression of being.
Wow. That's just infinitely attractive and healing and inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So much. Well, I'm left wordless after that. Is there anything more you'd like to share before we close?
Well, one of the discoveries that I had and didn't intend to have was kind of that which is beyond self. And that has been part of certain paths, traditional paths down through the ages, and kind of the discovery of emptiness or nothingness or oneness, but oneness that isn't inclusive of individuality, has been not particularly part of my path and hasn't been particularly part of the whole being realization intention. And I'm noting it here because I noticed in my own path various times the truth of that which is beyond self became apparent. And it continued in my well-integrated kind of whole being experience. And it adds an illumination to the fabric of creation that is a spectrum from nothingness to everythingness. And in that, it's awkward, and just like the awakening process for many of us was a bit awkward. It's like, oh, I'm all of this, and I'm only this, that kind of feeling. So from this awakened wholeness to feel like, oh, there's this nothingness and there's this wholeness, how does that work? Well, it's not a figuring out, but I'm mentioning it because people have these little recognitions at times, and it's valuable to allow awareness to show up in what ways it does, and be interested in the way that it's unfolding, because we're not creating our path of evolution, we're awakening, discovering into it. And that that beyond selfness is an enrichment to realize essence of creation, the ultimate kind of essence of self, a sacred condition, a sacred dimension of realization and recognition. And that's a thrilling possibility that we don't need to go on based on belief or working on it, because the more refined we become in our whole being realization, the more that these elements naturally show themselves. And knowing that showing themselves is natural and rich is the one helpful thing to cooperate with, to give space for, to be with, as greater refinement and beauty kind of unfolds in our awakened nature.
Oh. I just feel deeply healed and grateful. That's such a beautiful teaching and transmission as you speak it.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I mean, your presence and your intention for this is so beautiful, and it's let me feel free in expressing some things that I haven't been expressing too broadly to too many.
I'm so glad we've captured this then for the benefit of others. Thank you so much, Rod.
Oh, you're welcome.
Pause our recording now.
Mm-hmm.